controversy at film festival. The Leasty system played host to the second week of the
Frameshift drive charging.
Alliance Festival of Culture, where a new film production has caused minor controversy. The Alliance Tribune's cultural correspondent Corinne McIntyre offered these details. A grand celebration of cinematic art.
4, 3, 2.
Plays at George Lucas Station, featuring a wide range of traditional and interactive media from dozens of systems. The talking point was undoubtedly Unity, a historical drama from award-winning director Howard. It portrays Alliance founders Mick Turner and Meredith Argent as rivals who fake their romance to rally political support. More traditionalist audiences, and
Fuel scooping.
not a few critics, took issue with the suggestion that the couple's love was fraudulent, while others applauded it as bold and challenging. But this lively debate did nothing to dampen spirits at the event, which drew appreciative crowds. The Alliance Festival of Culture is scheduled to continue over the next 5 weeks. Red Family operation concludes. The Federal Intelligence Agency has declared that its campaign against the Red Family cartel is drawing to a close. As observed by Ethan Takahashi, crime correspondent for the Federal Times. In terms of effective action, this has to be considered a great victory for the FIA. A series of coordinated strikes against the Red Family delivered a mortal blow, and the cartel's super-addictive narcotic was destroyed before it could be mass-produced. While Kingpin Oberon Church remains at liberty,
Fuel scoop disengaged.
it is
Frameshift drive
unlikely that he
charging.
could ever rebuild his empire. Still, losing one of the most wanted criminals in the Federation must be frustrating for the agency. Internal investigations continue regarding Yen Sandoval's death in custody. No conclusive
3, 2.
evidence has been uncovered, but many believe that Sandoval could not be reached without the assistance of FIA personnel. It is not unreasonable to assume that individuals within the FIA have been bought by Church, said Takahashi. Lathe citizens comment on festival. As the first week of the Alliance Festival of Culture draws to a close, Lathe residents
Fuel scooping.
have shared mixed feelings about the decision to stage the opening ceremony in their home system. Clearly this was a political gesture from Edmund Mahone, said Grady Chen, an independent journalist speaking at Lathe Station. An independent faction rules Lathe now. There was military conflict. Last year. Yet we have Alliance leaders trying to garner support despite losing control of the system. It's blatant propaganda. Sarai Messima, a financial consultant, offered a different opinion when interviewed at
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive charging.
Sidewinder. Lathe has been an Alliance system for decades. We lived by the Alliance's ethos for a couple of generations, you know. Sure, we've got Lathe Radio in control of the system now, but that doesn't change who we...
4, 3, 2.
are, or what makes us Lathians. A spokesperson for Lathe Radio, Dr. Alan Stroud, provided the following statement. It was quite a surprise that the organizers decided to open the festival in Lathe, but I guess they see things the same way we do. We're all just trying to get along, and there's much to celebrate about the Alliance, regardless of whether your system is a current or former member. I'm looking forward to Lathe welcoming as many visitors as possible. Come for the festival, the brandy, the radio station, or one of
Frameshift drive charging.
our many other attractions, and we'd be delighted to host you. Enclave established in Witchhead Nebula. Recent reports from the Witchhead Nebula indicate that the Thargoid forces in the region
4, 3, 2.
have been defeated. The initial call call to arms from Aegis Research was met with an overwhelming response from independent pilots, who were able to push back Thargoid incursions from the new human colonies. Admiral Adam Tanner, Chief Military Liaison for Aegis, said, "Humanity has achieved a decisive victory in the Witch Head Nebula. Significant numbers of Thargoid vessels were destroyed in the conflict, even as many independent pilots were lost. But the sacrifice of
Frameshift drive charging.
these brave souls was not in vain, for the enemy has been forced to withdraw. While the threat of occasional incursions from Thargoid craft remains, our colonial assets have been firmly established in the region."
4, 3, 2.
Professor Albert Tesreau of Aegis Research looked to the future. The Alliance, Empire and Federation have declared that the Witch Head Nebula is now an official enclave of humanity, a region that their joint efforts have enabled them to share equally. But the damage inflicted on our new starports must be repaired before we can harvest the barnacle sites in the area. Independent pilots have already given so much, and for that I am humbled and thankful. And yet, we must ask for one last favor, to support the repair of these starports. A new home for Professor Palin. Professor Ishmael Palin has established a
Frameshift drive charging.
permanent base of operations in the Arc system. Aegis Research confirmed the news with a statement from Professor Albert Tesreau. Having fled the Mayo system, Professor Palin and his staff have installed their equipment at the
4, 3, 2.
Planetary Portable Laboratory on Arc 4E. All of the engineering services previously offered by Professor Palin are now available at his new location. His study of meta-alloys and other Thargoid-related materials has also resumed.
Incoming mission critical message.
The megaship Carson Spring, which facilitated an emergency evacuation of the Palin Research Center, has left the Arc system to resume other duties. Week in review. Here are this week's main stories. Thargoid forces have entered the Witch Head Nebula in response to human colonization efforts in the area. Professor Albert Tesreau of Aegis Research has urged independent pilots to engage Thargoid vessels in the nebula and ensure that the superpowers can establish bases close to nearby meta-alloy sites. In related news, Professor Palin has successfully relocated with his team to the Arc system. Palin's megaship, Carson Spring, was able to fend off a number of Thargoid assaults and complete its scheduled journey. Palin's team is currently working to establish a permanent base of operations in the system. Jens Sandoval, co-founder of the Red Family Cartel, has been found dead in a Federal Intelligence Agency safe house. Autopsy reports confirm.
message. Frameshift drive charging. Fuel scooping complete.
That a highly specialized neurotoxin was the cause.
The Federation. Introduction. For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world, and all the wonder that would be. Saw the heavens fill with commerce, argosies of magic sails, pilots of the
Frameshift drive charging.
purple twilight, dropping down with costly bales, till the war drum throbbed no longer, and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World.
4, 3, 2.
Alfred Lord Tennyson, Locksley Hall, 1835.
Now then, to attempt the impossible task of summing up the Federation. We are the ones who draw the lines. Our forefathers, who lived through the
Fuel scooping.
interact. Of global wars, drew a line under them and declared, no more. We enshrined the rights of all citizens in our Constitution, underlined them, and signed. We plotted the lines that first linked the star systems, bringing humanity to the shores of new worlds, opening the way to interstellar trade. And when humanity itself, in the exuberance of youth, threatened the delicate balance of alien life, again we drew a line. Thus far let us lawfully tread, and no further.
Isaac Gellin, Federation President. Inaugural speech, 2862. The Federation is the oldest of the galaxy's three superpowers, a vast geopolitical entity reaching out from the core system
Fuel scooping complete.
of Sol and encompassing a broad socio-economic spectrum. Among the myriad federal star systems, one can find extraordinary wealth, crushing poverty, and everything in between. By contrast with the Empire,
Frameshift drive charging.
which offers a social safety net in the form of state-sanctioned slavery, the poorest members of federal society have no safeguards and no way out. For them, life on the graffiti state
4, 3, 2, 1.
streets is inescapable, and the gulf between their lives and those of the super rich could not be more insurmountable. At its best, the Federation embodies the values of its founding nations: democracy, industry, and liberty. But federal society can also be competitive and unforgiving. Corporations wield too
System scan complete.
much power, politicians are often corrupt, and a sink-or-swim ethos prevails.
Frameshift drive charging.
The Federation. History. The nations of Earth united in the aftermath of war. After the devastation of World War III, the United States of the Americas
4, 3, 2,
rose to become the planet's dominant nation. Over the following years, it gradually brought the other nations of the world under its aegis. Called at first the Federation of the USA, the expanding democracy was soon given the less exclusive title of the Federation. Humanity reached for the stars. When faster-than-light travel became a reality in the 22nd century, several terrestrial corporations competed fiercely to establish the first human colony in a new star system. Tau Ceti was the first system to be colonized, followed by Delta Pavonis, Beta Hydria, and Altair. In their wake, there followed a wild scramble of pioneering expeditions
Frameshift drive charging.
and colonial ventures. The first colony rebelled. The year 2161 saw a dispute between the colony of Tau Ceti III and the Federation Authority.
4, 3, 2,
Centered on the colonists' repeated refusal to limit the damage they were inflicting on the alien ecosystem. Earth dispatched a fleet with orders to revoke the colony's charter. The colony responded by declaring independence. A military stalemate led to grudging compromise, and the Federal Accord resulted, granting the system rights and representation along with concomitant duties. The Federation, born on Earth, was now an association of star systems. The Birthright Wars gave corporations preferential treatment. Starting in 2621, a group of corporations subjected the federal
Frameshift drive charging.
government to over a century of unrelenting pressure. They demanded the right to buy up underexploited colonial land from its hereditary owners. Under the terms of the original charters, the
4, 3, 2,
land belonged to the colonists and their descendants, regardless of their ability to mine, farm, or otherwise exploit it, meaning that immense resources were lying untapped. The corporations argued that with the machinery, workforce, and fleets at their disposal, they could tap those resources. The Federation would be
fuel scooping.
enriched, the original owners would be compensated, and everyone would be satisfied. The Federation bowed to pressure and allowed compulsory purchase of the family's land, albeit for far less than the expected sums. Outrage, rebellion, and in one case, the defiant resettlement of an entire colony resulted. The Federation's detractors often point to this dark episode as indicative of its true nature, a mere administrative puppet bent to the will of rapacious corporations. The Federation. Society. A federated democracy. The Federation's legislative body is made up of congressmen elected to represent their system or state. Apart from the oldest core systems such as Sol, which encompasses multiple states, each star system within the Federation is considered a single state. New colonies do not qualify for full Federation membership until and unless they fulfill the development objectives set down for them. With self-reliance comes representation. The federal government has its seat on Mars, which was terraformed in 2286. Congress was moved there from Earth in the early third millennium. The executive branch is headed by an elected president with a fixed 8-year term. Constitutional rights obtain. The sovereign rights of all individuals are enshrined in the Constitution, which is a modified and streamlined version of the US Constitution, originally codified in the 18th century. The right to liberty underscores the absolute ban on slavery within the Federation and is a point of contention with the Empire. Corporate interests dominate. Although the Federation is loudly and proudly democratic, corporations still exercise tremendous influence over the democratic process, shaping citizens' choices through celebrity endorsement, lobbying, and occasionally outright corruption. The government is notoriously reluctant to curb corporate activity. The typical question in Congress is not whether a given policy will favor corporate interests, but which ones it will favor. Competition between corporations for Congress support can lead to a deadlock in the government. The Federation. Military. The Federal Navy. The Federation has maintained a battle fleet since the days of the first federal colony, which was established in the Tau Ceti system. Its official mandate is to protect shipping and defend the borders of federal space, but it has also frequently been deployed against the Federation's own rebellious citizens. At first, the Federation's member systems were required to contribute the required ships, making the mustering process a cumbersome one. But following the Birthright Wars, corporations were chartered to produce centralized fleets, which made for a far more efficient system. The Naval Shipyards and Training Academy were originally based in the Anlave system, but the Academy has since been moved to the custom world of Navy Central in Eta Cassiopeia. The Navy benefited from massive investment following the forced sell-off of colonial land in the
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive charging.
Wars, during which it was wielded against the colonists in a bitterly resented move. When the Thargoids were first encountered in 2849, the Navy was boosted once again in
4, 3, 2, 1.
fear of the alien threat, and a further bolstering followed in 2867, in the aftermath of what were believed to be Thargoid attacks. Governor Raul Santorini championed heavy cuts to the Navy budget in 3022, which were not reversed until President Varian Scott came to power in
Fuel scooping.
3144. Scott talked up the Thargoid threat, again increasing funding to the Navy and removing the requirement for military actions to be approved by congressional vote. Land forces. In addition to the rank and file, the Federation still enjoys the loyal service of special military divisions, such as the Gurkha Regiment, who have served since the days of Earth. Keeping up long-standing traditions such as this is an important link to the past for Federal citizens. The Federation. Culture and values. If you want to eat, you have to work.
Fuel scooping complete.
The Federation has no room for freeloaders. It has nurtured the core frontier values of self-reliance and entrepreneurship since its inception, and respects the self-made citizen. This insistence
Frameshift drive charging.
on paying your way and pulling your weight also applied, notoriously, to the process whereby new colonies were established, until a given colony was able to fulfill the development goals set down for it by the
4, 3, 2, 1.
Federation. It could only ever be a dependency with no voice of its own. Given that the Federation's assigned goals could vary wildly from one colony to the next, this requirement frequently chafed with the colonists. While the Federation maintained that it was simply exercising flexibility,
Fuel scooping. System scan complete.
since no two worlds were the same, some colonies were tempted away to the Empire by the promise of being recognized as sovereign without having to jump through arbitrary hoops. Corporations took humanity into space. The Federation has never forgotten the role played by private enterprise in the initial migration from Earth. Corporations enjoy substantial freedom and influence under the Federation, so much so that it often seems they are the powers truly running the show. Federal citizens can be as passionately loyal to their corporations as they would be to
Fuel scooping complete.
a family or clan group, and it is common for successive generations of a given family to serve the same corporation. Harvest the limitless riches of space, but respect non-human life. The Federation
Frameshift drive charging.
and the Empire have hugely differing views on the primacy of humanity in the cosmos. While the Federation insists that its colonies treat indigenous non-human life with care, the Empire typically takes a
4, 3, 2, 1.
more human-centric approach. This attitude has allowed the Empire to poach several developing Federation colonies who felt themselves hamstrung by ecological regulations. Wealth is freedom. Federal citizens actively embrace corporate culture,
Fuel scooping.
express
System scan complete.
their identity through brand choices and media consumption. The Federation. Diplomatic relations. The Empire. In 2292, a group of colonists established a settlement on Akanar 6D, chosen for its remoteness. The original intent was merely to live free from interference, but autocrat Henson Duval rapidly took control of the colony and had himself proclaimed emperor. The Federation attempted military reprisals, partly due to the nascent Empire's insistence on independence, but
Fuel scooping complete.
faced a harder fight than they had expected and were held at bay. Over the next 50 years, the Empire expanded to many other worlds. The Federation's relationship with the Empire is one of entrenched mistrust, stemming
Frameshift drive charging.
from irreconcilable ideological differences, mollified somewhat by the corporations, which have a presence in both territories and thus act as a stabilizing influence. Outright hostilities
4, 3, 2,
between the powers, when they occur at all, are usually conducted through proxy forces. The Alliance. In 3228, the federally aligned corporations supplying the Alioth system attempted to raise their prices, leading to a citizen rebellion.
fuel scooping.
Several independent systems assisted the rebels. Neither galactic superpower was able to suppress the revolt. The Empire was too far away to intervene effectively, whereas the Federation was hampered by unexpected public sympathy for the rebels. The Alliance of Independent Systems, founded on Alioth in 3230, drew in new members over the next 20 years. Some were already independent, while others defected from the Federation or Empire. In order to keep more worlds from defecting, the Federation was forced to reform the process whereby colonies could achieve full federal membership. So far, it has only managed to slow the loss of worlds to the Alliance, and has yet to tempt any back. The Federation. Introduction. For I dipped into the future, far as human
Fuel scooping complete.
Individuals. Individuals. Aiden Tanner.
Our species has been banding together to fight the outsider since we lived in caves.
Frameshift drive charging.
We stand against the lawless, the invaders, and the monsters. And we're proud to do it. But you have to remember
4, 3, 2,
one thing. Nobody in the history of conflict ever saw himself as a monster. Everyone believes they're the hero of their own story. If you can't understand that, if you can't stand in the enemy's shoes, even for a second, and
fuel scooping.
ask yourself why he thinks he needs to kill you, then you don't know what it means to be a soldier.
Aiden Tanner, addressed to Federal Cadets, 3298. Admiral Aiden Tanner is a senior officer in the Federal Navy. He has served for more than 4 decades, and in 3303 was given significant responsibility in the struggle against the Thargoids, first being appointed to Chief of Federal Security and
Fuel scooping complete.
later to Chief Military Liaison for the Cross-Superpower Initiative, Aegis. He is widely respected, even outside of federal space, for his conscientious and level-headed approach to conflict.
Frameshift drive charging.
Born in 3254, Tanner was expected to follow in the footsteps of his authoritarian father by becoming a doctor, but instead enlisted in the Federal Navy, along with a group of friends, in what he would later...
4, 3, 2, 1.
to describe as a rash act of adolescent rebellion that I have not once regretted. Tanner's father died in 3277. The two never resolved their estrangement. Tanner's early naval career was anything but distinguished. Known to his comrades in arms as Spoonie for his
System scan complete.
habit of eating directly from food packets instead of using plates, he was distinguished more by his irreverent sense of humor than his competence. 6 months in, Tanner was found
Frameshift drive charging.
to be responsible for a scurrilous newsletter that satirized several senior officers, including Sergeant Burke Hazel, who was offended and deeply hurt. Hazel had taken a personal interest in Tanner and
4, 3, 2, 1.
encouraged him to persist when the cadet had struggled with basic training. Tanner's defense that he had been trying to improve morale was rejected, and although he was allowed to continue his service, he was marked as a potential insubordinate, a label that would later return to haunt him. Tanner's chief instructional officer,
Fuel scooping.
Commander Myra Dunstock, warned him to take military life more seriously. She took Tanner to a refugee facility, an experience he would later characterize as showing him what the military is there to prevent. Tanner recognized a last chance when he saw it, discarded his role as camp comedian, and threw himself into his training with unprecedented energy. The decisive incident in Tanner's career was the Autolycus Mutiny of 3271. At the time, Tanner was serving as Chief Gunnery Officer on board the FDN Autolycus, a Farragut-class battlecruiser, under the command of Captain Jaden Horn. The ship was dispatched to restore order at Cold Harbor Station, which had been occupied by rebels following a descent into civil disorder. Captain Horn's orders were to monitor the station and await reinforcements, but when contact with the station was abruptly lost, he became convinced an attack was imminent. Surveillance footage later showed Horn acting in an increasingly erratic fashion. He screamed orders, slurred his words, and struck an ensign for making a minor mistake. Seeing a group of civilian ships preparing to leave the station, Horn ordered Tanner to open fire, convinced they were about to ram the Autolycus. Tanner refused to obey the order, claiming it was unlawful and that Horn was unfit to command. In the time it took for a furious Horn to have Tanner thrown in the brig, the escaping ships had jumped out of the system. At
Fuel scoop disengaged.
Tanner's court-martial, Horn tried to use his history of rebelliousness against him, but an explosive series of revelations followed.
Frameshift drive charging.
The escaping ships had been carrying evacuees, and the station's apparent silence was in fact due to Horn himself, who had disabled shipborne communications without telling his crew. Horn, who it
4, 3, 2, 1.
later emerged had been suffering from lexalamine-induced psychosis, committed suicide mid-trial by hijacking a fighter and detonating a grenade inside the cockpit. Tanner was exonerated, receiving a commendation from
Incoming mission critical message.
President Antonia Madison for his actions.
Fuel scooping.
Individuals. Aisling Duval.
My grandfather had an heirloom he used to keep in our winter palace. It was a priceless marble statuette of one of our ancestors standing with his foot on a woman's neck, while she looks up at him in fear or adoration, probably both. I loathed it. It was commissioned to commemorate some victory or other, but that wasn't the point of the thing. The message was clear, and it's the same one I've heard all my life. Deep down, the people we dominate are happy to be dominated. When I was 6 years old, I smashed it. The servants came running. My father stormed down the stairs in his gown. He asked if it was an accident. There was such a strange look in his eyes. I knew that if I said yes, nobody would argue. Nothing more would be said. but
Fuel scoop disengaged.
I didn't. I stamped my foot and said, "No, Daddy. I did it on purpose." It's the same with tradition. The people who pass it on think it's precious. They expect you to cherish it and pass it on in turn. But what they think doesn't matter, because the responsibility rests with you. If you know it's wrong, then you have to smash it. On purpose.
Aisling Duval. A fireside chat with Serena, 3301. Princess Aisling Duval, born in 3276, is a prominent member of the imperial royal family. The eldest child of the infamous Prince Harold, she had a troubled upbringing. Her father was notorious for his hedonistic lifestyle, while her mother, entertainer Imogen Eccentrica Gabriellini, died from an aneurysm shortly after Aisling's birth. The autopsy identified the cause of death as an overdose of purple sunflake, an obscure and expensive narcotic, but conspiracy theorists insisted that she was murdered to remove an embarrassment to the royal family. Aisling has indicated that she is aware of these rumors, but has never commented on them. Despite living a life of great privilege, Aisling has publicly embraced the cause of the less fortunate and become an outspoken opponent of slavery, something that has made her the target of fierce criticism from more traditionalist imperials. But despite this criticism, Aisling is a popular figure with a widespread media presence. Her campaigning has brought definite benefits to many of the poorest in imperial society, and gone some way towards easing tensions between the Empire and the Federation. Her critics, however, dismiss her as a puppet, doing the bidding of a shadowy circle of advisors. They claim there is no underlying coherence to Aisling's policies. To them, she is a naive and sentimental child, without the necessary experience for politics, backing one populist cause after another, always conscious of how her activism is affecting her brand. Significantly, the most savage of Aisling's critics and the staunchest of her defenders agree on a counterpoint to this, that her apparent vacuity is nothing but a front, carefully created in collusion with the very advisors whom others believe are exploiting her. The People's Princess, they argue, is exceptionally good at being underestimated. Following the death of Hengist Duval in 3301, Aisling was considered by many to be a viable contender for the imperial throne. As
Mission objective complete.
Aisling was born out of wedlock, however, and her father was removed from the line of succession on the grounds of mental incapacity, Orissa Lavinie Duval was deemed to have the stronger claim. Individuals: Albert Esro.
Frameshift drive charging.
I may not be religious, but I still have faith. Not that
4, 3, 2, 1. Engage.
kind my parents have. In fact, I don't think their desperate devotion can even be called faith. The point of faith is that it's tested. And if you insist that your beliefs are above criticism or analysis like the star cults do, you're refusing to allow your faith to be tested at all. What do I have
Frameshift drive charging.
faith in? The fundamental sanity of the universe, I suppose. I don't believe in absolute evil, only in the iniquity that emerges when understanding fails. I believe intelligent life will naturally tend
4, 3, 2, 1.
towards cooperation rather than conflict, not because there's a higher power guiding our decisions, but because that's simply the most logical course. And yes, our recent experiences with Thargoids have tested that faith harshly.
Albert Esro.
Fuel scooping.
Professor Albert Esro is an imperial scientist, an affiliate of the Achenar Research Council, and a founding member of the Joint Superpower Initiative Aegis, which was established in August 3303 to investigate the Thargoid menace. She currently serves
Fuel scooping complete.
as Aegis's head of research. Tesro's biological parents were members of the Besmeratu cult, an isolationist group secreted within a sealed compound. that believed itself to have been chosen for salvation by non-human beings. The cult's charismatic leader, Anton Hotep, claimed humanity had been under the protection of these beings for millennia, that he
Frameshift drive charging.
was their cosmic messiah, and that only the believers would be saved from the coming apocalypse. In support of these claims, he often produced alien artifacts, allegedly sourced from archaeological digs.
4, 3, 2,
That other cult members were never permitted to examine closely. Alba was marked as a troublemaker from an early age due to her heretical belief in rationality and the scientific method. She was formally banished from Besmeratu after she sabotaged the air purifying system, forcing the compound to call for help from outsiders and thus humiliating her.
fuel scooping.
After her story became public knowledge, she was adopted into the household of Senator Olivia Tesreau of Akana and awarded a scholarship to study at Grand Imperial, alongside the children of the nobility. She wrote her master's thesis on the potential uses of mathematics as a lingua franca between human beings and intelligent non-humans. She is passionately interested in non-human intelligence and meaningful discourse between species. Despite the counterfeit alien contact myths of her early life, or perhaps because of them, she is determined to do whatever she can to act as a bridge between human and non-human cultures. Individuals. Archon Delane.
I'll tell you, Delane is the most trustworthy cuss you could ever work with. Why? Because he always makes good on his threats. Anyone else tells you that they're gonna cut off your index fingers and hammer them into your sinuses with your own severed foot, you know it's just bluster. But if Delane tells you that, you know he'll do exactly what he says, to the letter. He wants people to be afraid of him, and that means he keeps his promises. You gotta respect that.
Mantle Hoek, arms trader. Archon Delane is the head of the Cumo crew, a powerful criminal syndicate. He refers to himself as the Pirate King, a title not recognized
Fuel scooping complete.
by any government. Delane's early life is not documented, and there are competing legends of his origin. Some believe he grew up in a drug den on one of the frontier worlds where he learned to fight. Other stories have him
Frameshift drive charging.
working as a bouncer in the brothel where he was born, or training as a grease monkey at an orbital shipyard that hosted clandestine arena fights after hours. What is certain is that Delane challenged and slaughtered
4, 3, 2,
the reigning pirate lord of the Cumo crew when he was only 15. The title of Pirate Lord is only transferred on the death of the incumbent, either to a nominated successor or to the victim of a ritual challenge. According to tradition, the Pirate Lord must honor any challenge to his leadership,
fuel scooping.
regardless of who issues it, although the choice of weapons is left to him. In Delane's case, Pirate Lord Crab opted for a bare hands contest, a highly unusual choice. It has been suggested that Crab saw Delane as a weak target due to his albinism, unworthy of a Pirate Lord's personal
Fuel scooping complete.
attention. It is possible that Crab intended to give Delane a beating rather than kill him outright. If so, it was a
Frameshift drive charging.
fatal act of mercy. Footage of the fight shot by onlookers shows Delane deftly evading Crab's heavy blows, allowing the larger man to tire himself out before delivering a sudden jab to Crab's eye.
4, 3, 2,
Delane then battered Crab into submission, continuing to pummel the body until it was unrecognizable. The Cumo crew immediately split, dividing itself into those who saw Delane as a legitimate leader and those who refused to follow an unproven youth. The rift was soon closed, however, as Delane
System scan complete.
proved himself as capable a leader as he was a fighter. It became clear that Delane intended to establish
Frameshift drive charging.
not only his own reputation, but that of the crew. From then on, Delane crushed any dissent with the same uncompromising brutality he had shown to Crab. He took a zero-tolerance approach to the petty squabble,
Ready to engage. 4, 3, 2, 1.
that had previously paralyzed the Kumo crew, and in doing so, turned what had been an anarchic band of opportunists into a lethally effective raiding force. United in purpose and more organized than ever before, the Kumo crew quickly became the terror of the Pegasus sector, absorbing
System scan complete.
lesser pirate gangs, raiding civilian stations with
Fuel scooping.
impunity, and taking over corporate facilities. In Delane's early years of leadership, many rival pirate lords demanded the right to one-on-one combat, each of them convinced that they would be the one to strike him down and take over his enviable criminal empire. Delane met each challenger in turn, agreed to their choice of weapons, and promptly dispatched them. After the death of Pirate Lord Horvath, who Delane strangled with his own razor whip, there were no further challenges. Delane and his Kumo crew rule by fear, but they operate according to strict rules. If a settlement in Kumo territory has paid its tribute, any Kumo pirate foolish enough to raid it risks being stripped of his rank, his crew, his possessions, his skin, and his life, according to the severity of the offense. These are the infamous 5 strippings, instigated by Delane as a standard punishment across Kumo territory. Individuals. Arissa Lavinie Duval.
I am a daughter, not just of the Emperor, but of the Empire. And I look upon our traditions and achievements with pride. I hold, as my forefathers did, that to be born imperial is to receive the blessings of the universe. That is the true meaning of the ceremonial wine tipped upon our newborn heads. Does this pride in our heritage make me old-fashioned? Some would say so. I know that there are those in my family who cannot bear the burden of rank and privilege without a chronic sting of guilt. But I ask that you look charitably upon those so ailing, as I do. After all, rebellion is the prerogative of adolescence. I ask that you reserve your anger for a worthier target. For those who acknowledge our traditions in public, but privately serve only
Fuel scooping complete.
their own corrupt interests. For those who exploit their ancestors' sacrifices while holding our military in contempt. For all the petty, venal, spineless parasites in our very midst. I have sat with many such parasites, and for form's sake, I have masked my contempt. But that mask has served its purpose, and now
Frameshift drive charging.
I cast it aside. To the worms nestling so complacently in the heart of my beloved empire, I say this.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We see you, and we are coming for you.
Arissa Lavinie Duval, private speech given at her post-coronation dinner. Arissa Lavinie Duval is the reigning emperor,
Fuel scooping.
having been appointed to the position by the Imperial Senate, and a direct descendant of the first emperor, Henson Duval. Her father was originally thought to be the late Prince Aristide de Lavinie, but Arissa's claim to be the illegitimate daughter of Emperor Hengist Duval has since been ratified by DNA testing. Arissa distinguished herself as a serving senator early in life, unlike other senators who took their patron support for granted
Fuel scoop disengaged.
or left the work of intercession to a delegated representative. Arissa made a point of visiting and speaking directly with
Frameshift drive charging.
her patrons. Foremost among her concerns was how little scope for mobility the Empire offered. In theory, it was possible to rise in rank, but in reality, power was hoarded and
4, 3, 2, 1.
loyal service went unrewarded. To her mother's horror, Arissa proceeded to go undercover as a slave in the Lagani household on Akanar, talking to the staff and listening in on meetings. What she learned would change her view of the Empire forever. The rules could be broken with impunity, so long as the proper bribes
Fuel scooping.
were paid. A senator's favor could be secured, a corporation's accounts could be doctored, and an atrocity could be covered up for the right price. On paper, it might be a patronage system, but it operated as a de facto plutocracy. Arissa's experience as a slave also cemented her own view of imperial slavery, namely that it was no worse than indentured servitude, and downright luxurious compared to what the Federation's lowest-paid workers had to endure. Non-imperial commentators responded by pointing out that slaves in noble households on Akanar could hardly be held up as typical examples of slavery, and that Arissa might have learned more had she spent her time in a Mastopolos mining facility. Arissa has made no secret of her determination to restore the rule of law within the Empire. She means to purge it of
Fuel scooping complete.
corruption, and has received widespread public support for this cause. Unlike her niece, Aisling Duval, she sees the Empire's system as inherently worthy, if impeded by long-term neglect. They need to be cleansed, not torn down and rebuilt, as per Aisling's wishes. As the first woman to serve as Emperor, Arissa is a controversial figure to many, regardless of her personal political stance.
Frameshift drive charging.
Many hardcore traditionalists within the Empire have vowed to depose her and replace her with a ruler more to their liking. Individuals.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Denton Patrius.
What disgusts me? That's a perceptive question. By asking it, you reveal that you consider me a man of taste. If you'd asked me what I hated, I'm not sure I could have hidden my disappointment at such a banal
Fuel scooping.
question. But disgust, that deserves an answer. It's jealousy that most disgusts me. It's such a petty, self-defeating emotion. I see it every day. Most men look at me and think, I want what he has. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 thinks, how
Fuel scooping complete.
can I achieve what he achieved? Now, he's not jealous. He's motivated. Who knows? We might work together one day. But most men are not like that. They have the desire, but not the initiative.
Frameshift drive charging.
It's like a dog watching you eat and wishing he was a human. And that's the tragic thing about jealous people. They think they hate me, but really, they hate
4, 3, 2, 1.
themselves. Because deep in their hearts, they know they're too lazy to fight for their dreams.
Denton Patrius, a fireside chat with Serena, 3302. Denton Patrius is a powerful Imperial senator and
Fuel scooping.
Admiral of the Imperial Fleet. He is a controversial figure, admired by many Imperials for his wealth and influence, but deeply unpopular in other quarters for his uncompromising approach to debtors. He is also noted for commanding one of the strongest private military fleets in colonized space. Patrius has repeatedly issued loans to struggling governments via shell companies, only to later hike up the interest rates. When the government defaults on the loan, a common occurrence, Patrius moves in to foreclose. Since few governments are able to match the power of his private fleet, this is usually a one-sided affair, although some governments have appealed for and received the aid of independent pilots. This strategy has brought numerous systems under the control of Patrius's various corporations. If Patrius has any long-term goals beyond increasing his personal power and holding the line against the Alliance and the Federation, they are not publicly known. Politically, he has always played the part of the loyal Imperial. He accepts the need for progress, and has devoted considerable attention to eradicating Emperor's Dawn, an insurgent organization responsible for the assassination of Emperor Hengist of Al. His support for the Empire has been well rewarded, and as Admiral of the fleet,
Fuel scooping complete.
he enjoys an enviable level of prestige. But even this may not be enough, and many have speculated that Patrius harbors a desire to become Emperor. During the period of uncertainty that followed the death of Hengist of Al, Patrius suggested that the title of Emperor
Frameshift drive charging.
be assigned on the basis of public support, rather than lineal descent, a statement that was widely interpreted as a bid for the throne. When the succession passed to Orissa Lavinia de Val by vote of the
4, 3, 2, 1.
Senate, Patrius did not contest it. The question of who should succeed Orissa Lavinia de Val is now a pertinent one. Imperial commentators have suggested that Patrius's highly visible courtship of Princess Aisling de Val may be part of a long-term strategy, as well as a piece of savvy media
Fuel scooping.
manipulation. Orissa Lavinia de Val has no children, whereas a child born to a Patrius de Val partnership could be an extremely strong contender for the throne. Individuals: Edmund Mahon.
Naturally, we faced criticism over the Lu conflict. Many people thought we should have been in there, guns blazing. On the one hand, you have a system that wants to be independent, and on the other, you have the oppressive Federation telling them no. The authorities in Lu put out a call for aid, and what did the Alliance do? We turned them down. That would never have happened on the Holos, would it? I would have been at the head of the Alliance fleet, taking down the Fed-Cap ship with a well-aimed torpedo up the tailpipe. But life isn't like the Holos. You need political and legal clarity. When Lu asked for our help, who exactly was doing the
Fuel scooping complete.
asking? The people? All right then, which people? Who counted their votes, and how was the process monitored? Was their decision an
Frameshift drive charging.
informed one, or were they bombarded with propaganda? The Alliance is rigorous, you see. You can't join a voluntary association of free systems unless you can offer demonstrable proof of your freedom.
4, 3, 2, 1.
To choose, just as you can't enter into a contract without being of sound mind, acting without coercion.
Edmund Mahon, responding to a question from Jessica Braganza, one of a party of schoolchildren visiting the Prime Minister's residence. Edmund Mahon is the current Prime Minister of the Alliance. The product of a corn farming family based on Birmingham in the DSO system, Mahon
Fuel scooping.
was hard-working and shrewd from an early age, with a particular talent for negotiation. Nobody seemed able to beat his crop prices down, and he always managed to shave something off the asking price of any tools or machinery the family needed. In the first book of his autobiography, The Shadow of Silo 7, he attributes this talent to preparatory research, claiming that he always found out as much as he could about the people he would be dealing with before meeting them. At 18, Mahon won a federal scholarship to study law. Frustrated with what he saw as the imbalance of power between corporations and their employees, Mahon intended to specialize in cases of corporate exploitation. He quickly found, however, that the legal profession was not to his liking. Awash with duplicity, double talk, and corruption was his assessment, and he switched track to political science. 2 years into his course, and following an increasingly vocal series of broadcasts on a personal video channel in which he
Fuel scooping complete.
argued in favor of the newly formed alliance, Mahon's scholarship funds were abruptly cut off. He had unknowingly violated a clause that required him to refrain from public criticism of the federal government. Unwilling to return to his family without having made something of himself, Mahon had no choice but to look for work while continuing to study. The bar in which he had spent so many hours
Frameshift drive charging.
as a student was happy to take him on as a bartender, and he proved so competent that after his graduation he took on the role of manager. Mahon claims it was this experience, rather than any innate idealism, that
4, 3, 2, 1.
set him on the path to becoming a career politician. As he puts it, a good bartender has to be able to listen and to give equal respect to everyone while demanding that others do the same. He has to be able to distinguish what is meant from what is said, encourage free exchange of views while tactfully enforcing the rules, and, when
Fuel scooping.
necessary, break up fights. Mahon's break into politics came when his friends encouraged him to run for city office against the favored corporate candidate, Jensen Crane. The Mahon campaign began as a token protest, since Crane was expected to win by a comfortable majority. Mahon eviscerated Crane in the live debates, however, winning over the audience with a combination of wry humor and an empathetic awareness of local concerns that Crane could not hope to match, living as he did in a high-altitude apartment complex. Crane was elected by a narrow margin, but Mahon's supporters begged him to continue in politics. So it was that, at the age of just 27, Mahon found himself working alongside elder statesperson Irene Mendel, helping with a campaign to break the DSO system away from the Federation and make it a part of the Alliance. By the time DSO joined the Alliance in 3286, Mahon was a seasoned parliamentarian. He served as a planetary representative several times before making his bid for the premiership. Individuals.
Fuel scoop disengaged.
Felicia Winters.
Politics has always been a breeding ground for lies. But one lie outshines all the others. And today, we heard it once again. It is the insinuation that to seek a diplomatic solution
Frameshift drive charging.
is weak. That a preference for discussion over conflict means we're afraid to fight. We are accustomed to this, of course. We've heard the president's supporters pervert our words.
Ready to engage. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Again and again. When we face up to the Federation's previous wrongs, they mock us for our so-called liberal guilt. When we celebrate a détente between the superpowers that will help us oppose the Thargoid menace, they imply that we are traitors. But it is they who are afraid, and with good reason, because the people of the Federation have had enough. They will no longer be manipulated into reckless conflicts that serve only to fatten the wallets of the arms dealers and the privileged. They will no longer pretend that Hudson's tub thumping and saber rattling is anything more than vacuous propaganda. From star to star, Connolly to complex, satellite to station, we hear the same heartfelt
Fuel scooping.
cry. Let the mistakes of the past remain in the past, and let the Federation embrace only the best of itself. Let us return to the core values of hard work, honest trade, support for the vulnerable, and mutual respect. The people are ready for us. Let us be ready for them.
Felicia Winters, Liberal Party Annual Address, 3303. Felicia Winters is the head of the Liberal Party of the Federation, and as such serves as ex officio shadow president, opposite President Zachary Hudson of the Republican Party. Winters was born and raised on Taylor Colony, one of the oldest human colonies, and worked for the Sirius Corporation before going into politics full-time at the age of 44. Her current role was thrust upon her unexpectedly. Prior to 3301, Winters was Secretary of State to then-President Jasmina Halsey. When both Halsey and Vice President Ethan Naylor went missing aboard Starship One, Winters became acting president. The assumption of this responsibility left her visibly shaken, and despite her popularity in Congress, it was widely felt that she was not up to the job. The Liberal Party was in a state of crisis at the time following the Lu conflict. A group of forces had sought to make the Lu system independent from federal control, prompting a declaration of war from the Federation. Many of the party's supporters were shocked by President Halsey's decision to open fire on refugee ships during the conflict. According to reports,
Fuel scooping complete.
Winters had questioned the action, arguing passionately with her friend Halsey behind closed doors, while maintaining a front of public solidarity.
Frameshift drive charging.
Consequently, she found herself responsible for a party whose voter base had largely deserted it, and whose values had slipped out of alignment with her own. Shortly after Halsey's disappearance,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Harry Hudson called for an emergency vote of no confidence that he resoundingly won, resulting in his appointment to the role of president. Given the massive support for Hudson and the disarray among the Liberals, Winters was expected to resign and let the Liberal Party rebuild itself from the ground up. Instead, she threw herself
Fuel scooping.
into her work, leading efforts to persuade various systems not to defect to the Alliance, and distributing aid packages to planets in need. Her energetic and proactive approach led to fresh support for both her and her party, and she currently rivals Hudson in the popularity stakes. Individuals. Hengist Duval. Hengist Duval, 3163 to 3301, was the 15th ruler of the Empire. He was assassinated on the day of his wedding to Florence. Hengist reigned during a time of significant change. The Imperial Senate had begun to grow in power, a process that had begun during the long sickness of Hengist's father, Hesketh. The development of the frameshift drive had radically altered
Fuel scooping complete.
life in human-occupied space, facilitating easy access to goods and interstellar travel, and opening formerly isolated cultures to outside influence. Old
Frameshift drive charging.
animosities between the Empire and the Federation finally began to fade. Hengist appeared to neither resist nor oppose these many changes, instead opting to keep the Empire as stable as he could on a day-to-day
Ready to engage.
basis.
4, 3, 2, 1.
This middle ground approach was deeply unpopular with the Empire's hardcore traditionalist elements, who saw Hengist as short-sighted, detached, and complacent. In 3238, Hengist wed Anthea Viola Lampeter in an arranged marriage, planned since his childhood by his late father. Despite a storm of
Fuel scooping.
publicity and celebrations across Imperial space that verged on the hysterical, there was clearly little genuine affection between the couple. It was an open secret that the match had been made solely because of optimal genetic compatibility, and that Hengist could not refuse without dishonoring his father's memory. As the marriage crumbled, Hengist spent much of his time with his boyhood friend, Aristide de Lavigny, and his wife, Florence, in their estate on Achenar. Inflammatory tracts from this period portray the imperial dynasty and its noble cohorts as little more than libertines, indulging in lascivious affairs and lengthy holidays, while the Senate did the real work of government. The most scurrilous rumor was that the Duval genetic code had been corrupted by centuries of
Fuel scoop disengaged.
interference, prompting speculation that a successor of the true blood would have to be found. The birth of Hengist's heir, Prince Harold, temporarily quietened the skeptics. A carefully
Frameshift drive charging.
orchestrated father-son photoshoot when Harold was 9 showed the pair riding horses on Achenar, throwing javelins, watching a senatorial debate, and preparing for a seasonal feast. The photoshoot
4, 3, 2,
was clearly designed to appeal to traditional imperial values, and it succeeded. For several years after, Prince Harold was the darling of the Empire, a symbol of promise and hope. The intense media focus on the prince's life is now believed to be partly responsible for his fall from grace, which saw him become a notorious playboy and philanderer, and which eventually resulted in his exclusion from the succession on the grounds of mental incapacity. Towards
Frameshift drive charging.
the end of Hengist's life, it emerged that Arissa Lavigny, the daughter of Florence Lavigny, was in fact his daughter. Hengist intended to strengthen her claim to the throne by marrying Florence, thus legitimizing.
Ready to engage. 3, 2, 1.
Larissa, but he was assassinated before this could take place. The most enduring criticism of Emperor Hengist is that he failed to plan adequately for the future. Certainly, the matter of the succession created tensions that endure to this day. Individuals. Ishmael Palin.
If the history of eugenics tells us anything, it is that we do not tend towards greater egalitarianism over time, but rather find new ways for the privileged to exploit and control the dispossessed. Nevertheless, I do
Frameshift drive charging.
occasionally dream of ways in which we might evolve further. If I could change just one aspect of human nature, it would be our chronic
4, 3, 2, 1.
tendency towards tribalism. In that matter, we have barely advanced a step in 1,000,000 years. While the sun shines, we meet and treat with one another, but when the skies darken, we withdraw and whisper suspiciously. And at the first flash of the unknown, we huddle like witless primates in a
Frameshift drive charging.
cave, terrified of the thunder, trusting only those who smell the same as us.
Professor Ishmael Palin. Memorandum.
4, 3, 2, 1.
To students. 3289. Professor Ishmael Palin is a scientist specializing in research into non-human technologies and cultures, with a particular emphasis on material artifacts. He is generally considered one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the Thargoids. Professor
Fuel scooping.
Palin began his career working for the federal government as a member of the Homeland Scientific Council. In 3301, when objects apparently of non-human origin were discovered in a number of systems, the Federation launched a research program and placed Professor Palin in charge. To the surprise of many, the program was shut down after only a week. Ostensibly on the grounds of safety, Palin refused to comment on the decision, but inside sources later revealed stark differences of opinion between Palin and the federal authorities. Palin insisted that the fruits of his team's research into the so-called unknown artifacts, later reclassified as Thargoid sensors, should be open to everyone, but his federal paymasters wanted the Federation alone to benefit. Palin promptly established his own research body, the Palin Institute, and announced his intent to relocate to the Maya system, beyond the boundaries of superpower-controlled space. His ship disappeared shortly after he set off for Maya, however, and it was not until March 3302 that Palin and his crew were discovered, alive, in escape pods in the Oralos system. Palin revealed that unknown parties had abducted the team, held them captive, and questioned them extensively about their research. Shortly thereafter, Palin stepped down as the head of the Palin Institute in favor of Cora Shaw, citing opposition to his work from dark forces as the reason. He established his own independent research center on Maya A3A and began to study meta-alloys, a material sourced from the Thargoid structures nicknamed barnacles. In October 3302, Palin discovered that meta-alloys could be applied to the development of new defensive technologies. But no sooner had the news broken than the Federation blockaded his research center with a Farragut-class battlecruiser, preventing all access. The move was condemned by the Alliance and the Empire, but the Federation appeared to take no notice. Almost a year later, in September 3303, the federal blockade was lifted. No explanation was given either for the blockade or for its cessation. The event has since been interpreted as the beginning of the end of the Federal Imperial Cold War. Professor Palin's career has been an inspiration to many young scientists, partly because of his determination that research should benefit
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive charging.
everyone, and partly because of his dogged tenacity in the face of repeated interference. He was aware that by choosing to study the Thargoids, he was making himself a target, since there were shadowy agencies who
4, 3, 2, 1.
much wanted to be the sole beneficiaries of this research. but he defiantly persisted with his work nonetheless. Professor Palin may not consider himself heroic, but the fact remains that many less principled scientists in his position would have long ago submitted to intimidation or the promise of material reward.
Fuel scooping.
Individuals. Jasmina Halsey.
I know what they're saying. They're picking my story to pieces. Some of the criticism is rational. The lack of corroborative evidence, for example. I don't mind that. I'm telling the truth, after all. An irrational approach can't hurt the truth.
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive
What did they
charging.
say? What I experienced is an archetypal conversion story, and that makes it suspect? If what I saw reminds people of historical accounts, doesn't that say something?
4, 3, 2, 1.
About those experiences?
Jasmina Halsey, 3302. Jasmina Halsey, a former politician, served as president of the Federation from 3300 to 3301. She now works as a peace activist and close advisor to Alliance
Fuel scooping.
Prime Minister Edmund Mahon. Halsey claims the profound transformation of her views is the result of a visionary experience in which she communicated with benign non-human life.
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive
An
charging.
episode that allegedly occurred in 3301, following the destruction of her vessel, Starship One. Prior to the disappearance of Starship One, Halsey's presidency was unpopular among federal citizens.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Taxes had been raised too many times, and her military interventions were seen as heavy-handed. A campaign to ban the narcotic Onion Head went awry when the crops were firebombed, resulting in collateral damage. During the Lu Rebellion, Halsey gave the order to fire on a civilian convoy, in the belief that a rebel leader was on
Fuel scooping.
other vessels. Many senior commanders in the Federal Navy lost faith in Halsey and transferred their loyalty to then Shadow President Zachary Hudson. Hudson called for a vote of no confidence in Halsey's government shortly after Starship One went missing and achieved an overwhelming victory. Though Halsey was later found alive, drifting in an escape pod, suggestions that she might be reinstated as president gave
Fuel scoop disengaged. Frameshift drive charging.
Perhaps surprisingly, Halsey's account of her experiences has received a large degree of acceptance among the galactic community. But even those who accept her description of an encounter with non-human entities suspect
4, 3, 2, 1.
there's more to the story than has been made public. Skeptics hold that the event presents too many unanswered questions, such as precisely what happened to Starship One, as well as offering Halsey a suspiciously convenient way out of her failing presidential career. The most scathing of Halsey's critics condemn her as a traitor and defector who was conspiring with Edmund Mahon even before she left the Federation, and who staged the Starship One catastrophe as a convoluted means of defecting to the Alliance,
Frameshift drive charging.
taking vital federal intelligence with her. Halsey originally addressed these theories by emphasizing how incompatible they were with her behavior, citing her efforts to establish refugee centers
4, 3, 2, 1.
for victims of conflict and her public condemnation of the federal imperial Cold War. But more recently, she has simply laughed them off. Individuals. Lee Yong-Ro.
The fortune teller rattling bones in her simple hut, the smiling insurance salesman with his snakeskin briefcase, and the data analyst with his interactive holographic model are all selling the same thing: certainty. One of the paradoxes of human existence is that we crave the freedom to be spontaneous, thinking it essential to our nature, while constantly seeking reassurance that nothing unexpected is going to happen. We flatter ourselves with the belief that we are exempt from the rules of modeling that govern the rest of the universe.
Introduction to Becoming the Watchmaker. Lee Yong-rui's master's thesis on the innate human reluctance to accept behavioral predictability. Lee Yong-rui is the chief operating officer of the Sirius Corporation and its governmental subsidiary, Sirius Gov. Like many other members of the Lee dynasty, Yong-rui came to the corporate world from an academic background, having achieved doctorates in multiple fields and specializing in extrapolating potential future situations from limited data. Although he is in many respects an innovator, Yong-rui embodies the archetype of the healthy, energetic corporate executive, with little of the eccentricity that traditionally characterizes visionaries. A good deal of his popularity is attributable to his innate serenity and outward conventionality. Those who have worked under him describe him as radiating self-assurance and giving the impression that everything is completely under control. Yong-rui has brought a similar sense of constancy to Sirius Gov, giving the citizens under his governance the impression that they can trust their government to do the right thing, a rare achievement for any administration. Yong-rui has stated many times that he does not believe in the concept of chaos, holding that while order is objective, chaos is subjective. Since existence is fundamentally meaningful, any semblance of discord can only be the result of the observer's own failure to discern the underlying meaning. Although some might mistake Yong-rui's views for a form of mysticism, he is a staunch materialist. He attributes his success in economics to his insistence upon viewing the universe, especially its human component, in clear and unsentimental terms. All human behavior, he believes, can be reduced to simple, quantifiable factors, ultimately predicted upon enlightened self-interest. This approach, as well as being laudably rational, allows for truly impartial government. Individuals. Pranav Antal.
If my ancestors could see me today, would they approve of what I've done? I doubt it. Enlightenment is supposed to be hard work. In theory, it's accessible to anyone, but in practice...
Zorgon Peterson, Charlie Hotel Echo. Federal Flight Control Channel open. Observe docking protocols if you wish to land. Request approved.
Only those
Assigned
who
to
devote
landing
years
pad
of their life to
36.
meditation
Clear for automated approach vectoring.
can hope to accomplish anything. To do what we have done. To democratize the spirit through technology would look to my forebears like unforgivable laziness. But all things must happen in their appointed time. We now stand on the verge of overcoming the greatest obstacle to human progress there has ever been. The isolation of the human consciousness. Loneliness. Misunderstanding. Hatred. All forms of conflict result from this detachment.
Landing gear deployed.
But our technology allows us to truly see the world through others' eyes. We can finally achieve what the mystics and sages have spent centuries striving for.
Contact. Systems offline.
And break down the fortress of the individual ego.
Incoming message.
Pranav Antal. Pranav Antal is the leader of the Utopia movement, within which he is referred to by the honorific Sim Guru. Utopia is a visionary project with a goal to advance humanity scientifically, morally, and spiritually via the application of technology, with a particular focus on simulations, or sims, the digitized thoughts, emotions, and perceptions of another. Pranav inherited leadership of Utopia from his father, Rishi Antal. Rishi was the founder of Utopia and designer of the Sim Archive, a facility that allows the living to experience the digitized memories of the deceased. Although at present it is only possible to experience these memories passively, Pranav has mentioned the possibility of incorporating them into a simulated version of the individual, or data ghost, that could then be interfaced with,
Incoming message.
by allowing individuals to endure beyond death. In his youth, Pranav was expected to undertake a range of physical chores despite the technological and material wealth available to his family, and has often spoken of digging vegetables out of the ground and rebuilding collapsed cultivation tunnels after a storm. At the time, he begrudged these tasks, but having since assessed his deceased father's memories, he now appreciates that the work gave him an understanding of how the disadvantaged experience life, as well as reminding him that humanity is dependent upon the material world and must not hold it in contempt. Pranav is generally considered more commercially minded than his ascetic father, prompting his critics to condemn him as a plutocrat, with only a superficial interest in Utopia's ideals. His supporters, by contrast, paint him as combining the wisdom of his father with a shrewd commercial nous. Regardless, both sides agree that Utopia has undergone significant change under Pranav's leadership. Pranav's prevalent concern, apart from continuing to expand Utopia, is the Acheron interface. His claim is that this project will allow users to translate their consciousness directly into data, thereby surpassing the limitations of the physical self. Some commentators have expressed wariness, claiming the project steers unacceptably close to the development of artificial intelligence, which is prohibited throughout the galaxy. But Pranav's standpoint is that a system that translates intelligence into a new form, like the Acheron interface, is not artificial intelligence, since the human being remains at the core of the process. Individuals. Yuri Grom.
We have portraits of all the other leaders to accompany the articles. Only Grom remains. I have no idea what to expect. The man is more than half myth. Marcus and I sit in the lobby drinking tea that tastes vaguely of gunpowder and spices. The word comes through. Grom does not want to be photographed on the mocked-up throne we had in mind. He will stand in front of the station viewport with E.G. Prime hanging in space behind him. The cameras are ready. They have been ready for an hour. Without warning, Grom strides in. The makeup crew approach him, but he waves them away. He glances at their creams and paints. Then he's advancing on me, angry. "I do not hide these," he says, gesturing to the medals on his chest. "So why should I hide these?" He points to his scarred face. I splutter something about not meaning to offend him, but he gives me a slap on the back that jostles my vertebrae and lets out a laugh that could crack glass. I have never felt so out of depth in my life.
Carmine Renard, Galnet news agency photographer. Yuri Grom is the leader of the EG Pilots, an independent faction based in the Ural system. Grom was originally a federal admiral, but he retired from the Federation on ideological grounds. He has never publicly discussed the circumstances of his resignation, but it is believed he was disgusted by the corruption he discovered in the Federation. His retirement came as a shock to the senior members of Federal Command, who had expected him to become an instructor. A number of federal pilots who were loyal to Grom resigned at the same time, in order to continue serving under him. The Federation has never released a complete account of this episode, possibly in order to avoid embarrassment. His appetite for expansion notwithstanding, Grom inspires great loyalty in his followers, and even among those he conquers. Indeed, such people often prefer Grom's rulership to the one they originally had. No doubt due to Grom's well-attested talent for negotiation, insistence upon honorable combat, and fair treatment of captives. He is even rumored to have persuaded entire settlements to surrender without a single shot being fired. While Grom is admired by his own people and has earned the respect of the Empire and the Alliance, the Federation views him as a menace.